So welcome everyone as they flow through the door. We've got about 50 in here now so far. It's ramping up. I think we've had about 320 or so registrations, Mick, tonight. So you seem to be reasonably popular. So good on you. And to everyone out there, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to MaiaGrazing's series here on Grazing Innovators, Champions of Grazing Innovation. Tonight we've got Michael Gooden, or Mick Gooden. Welcome, Mick.
How are we, Cole?
Good, mate. Thanks for joining us. I must say, it's really good to finally get you on the webinar. You've been rather elusive, no, it's good to have you here, mate. We've been running I think half a dozen Champions of Grazing Innovation sessions this year, and you're the last cab off the rank for the year, and we'll be getting the series back up and going by April next year. So it's really good to squeeze you into the wonderful year that is 2020. Look, without further ado, I'll share my screen and we'll start to crack on. Have you got any words of wisdom as I start to share the screen, Mick?
Oh, I think 2020, probably from an agricultural perspective, has been a cracker of a year. So I sort of feel sorry for everyone else who's been swept up in all the other stuff that gets going on. But if you haven't had a good year in 2020 from an ag perspective in Australia, well, yeah, I think you set your standards pretty high. It's been pretty good compared to what we've had the last few years.
It's quite a contrast to last year. Mick, we'll get running with things. I'll just flick to this next slide. It's a rather handsome shot of you, so I'll put it on the second slide as well. But as people probably aware by now, my name's Cole Phelan, one of the team here at MaiaGrazing. It's a pleasure to have Mick with us from Old Man Creek Grazing. Bit of the run sheet, we've already done the welcome. A bit of the housekeeping can simply be, don't hesitate on starting to put a few questions through to us. A few people have sent questions through already prior to the webinar, so thanks for sending those through. So feel free to send some through during the session. Also, you can chat amongst yourselves on the sidelines. We're just going to jump into essentially what Michael's story is, the who, the what, the why and how of Mick and his business, and then just I guess ask Mick about his opinions of what he sees on the horizon and the opportunities and what some of his takeaway messages are, and then we'll get into the question and answer, and we'll get moving. So it's a 30-minute session tonight, so we won't keep everyone too late, but it's wonderful to be welcoming people from all around the globe. We've got people from the Philippines, all over Australia, New Zealand, the States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Germany. I've had a quick look at the list of registrations and the people coming through and familiar names, so it's wonderful to have you all with us. Just to give a bit of context to where Mick is joining us from, this is a little bit of a map of his property, and I'll blow it out here. That's Michael there in the green circle with the yellow dot, and I'm coming from the pink one on the east coast there. So it's sort of over to you, Mick. The who, the why, the what, the how of Mick Gooden. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, thanks, Cole. I really appreciate the opportunity to probably share a little bit of our story. I am a client of Maia and been using the program for a couple of years now, 3 or 4 years. And so, yeah, for us, it's a part of our suite of decision-making tools that we use. The who, I suppose, for us is, yeah, I'm Michael Gooden. My wife and I run 1,000 acres, just Willow Lee's the property name, and on that property we run a small seed stock Angus business, and it's a farm that's been in our family since the late 80s. Our family's been farming in the area since the 1940s, and in Australia farming since the 1850s. So we've sort of been around for a little while, but what we're doing now, we sort of made some pretty significant changes in our business, probably as a hangover from the millennium drought. I was back involved in our larger family business in the early 2000s, and sort of graduated from uni and thinking we know everything, and came back into the business in 2004. And yeah, just, you know, it's an interesting time. You think you learn all these different things and exposed to a bit of rotational grazing, sort of short recovery rotational grazing on a property I did in Hamilton in the Western District in 2002. And that really highlighted to me, that was an extremely high input system. And we could grow a lot of grass, but we were having lots of metabolic issues with animals, using lots of urea, lots of phosphorus, and just running 100 mile an hour at the wall all the time. But the wall kept moving away. In the Western District, the wall sort of, you know, we could always have a few other levers to pull. In the Riverina where we are, 450 mil rainfall, a lot more variable climate, especially in the last sort of 10 years. You know, my father always said, no 2 years are the same. And it's just one of those things that could not be true. Like, we just don't get, we've never had a year that is our average rainfall. So we've just got to be constantly planning about monitoring how much grass is ahead of us, how many days have we got, how many stock have we got on, should we have more, should we have less, what are the decisions that we're making in and around that.
And tell us, Mick, you talked about, you know, variable climate in terms of what we're looking at there on the left-hand side. That's not a permanent creek or dam or lake, is it?
No, so that is that would have been taken in October 2016, and that was my mode of transport to work. There was, it's probably 400 metres across there to a set of cattle yards. And the water in the middle there would be probably 2 metres deep, 8 foot deep, and running pretty solidly, it was, I used to have to row pretty solidly to get across there without ending up too far downstream. And it was like that for probably 8 weeks. So about a third of our farm goes underwater like that. And that was in a big flood year, and that happened in 2012. A very similar thing occurred. So that splits our place into a third and causes a few headaches when you're trying to do a planned grazing. But I mean, this is one of the things we just had to adjust where we were going to be, and knew we couldn't get out that way. And we had, you know, a couple of 100 acres on the other side of that water where we couldn't get to for a while as well. And also, just on top of that, at that very point in time, our power went out on the property, transformer blew up, and I had to actually bring in fuel to run a generator to keep our pressure system operating. Although we had water everywhere, we rely wholly and solely for stock water on a pressure system, and I was bringing in petrol to keep a generator going. I had to be in the property every 30 hours. Yeah. And
I guess, you know, contrast to the right of our screen now. When was this taken?
So that really smoky photo, it's on my right. I think it might be the same for everyone else. That was taken on about the 5th or 7th of January this year, and that was probably about as bad as I hope it will ever get on our place. Like, it felt like Armageddon that day. I was actually involved in the bushfires. A friend of mine at Adelong had been up onto their place and sort of on the fire front for a couple of stints, and that was a pretty, you know, challenging period, seeing the fires in that landscape face to face. But then, you know, we're 200 k's away from there, and we're out on the plain, and it was horrible. It would have been 45 degrees when I took that picture, and
you've got a bit of a shade cloth there. There's no stock there. So were you totally destocked during this period, or what was your situation there, and how did you get to that sort of making the decisions of whatever that was at the moment?
So at that point in time, we had locked all our cattle up in confinement, and which was something that I sort of thought, we'll never do. Like, when I did the holistic management training in 2010, and I've done grazing for profit as well, and you know, one of those rules was, you know, never drought feed. In our situation with the seed stock business, we made the decision in 2018. We sold a lot of cattle out, and then we got down to what we sort of called our core breeders, sort of 50 to 60 cows, and we made the decision from a financial perspective and probably just a longevity of where we really wanted to be heading with our breeding objectives. We said, that we're going to feed these animals. We wouldn't have fed them for perpetuity, but we were pretty committed. Like, we've bought enough feed for 180 days. You know, we went into a closed season in about September last year, which was the earliest we'd ever been. And by Christmas time, we were confinement feeding, and we basically fed until about Easter this year. But when we let cattle out, we had feed, you know, a foot high, basically on the whole place.
And just for everyone out there, when you say closed season, that's essentially end of the growing season. That's when you're looking at feed on hand and starting to look at your observations of what available feed do we have in each paddock that we need to get these animals through until it's going to start growing again.
Yeah.
That's what you mean by a closed season?
Yeah, very much so. Straight out of the holistic management playbook. Like, you know, we just did a big pasture assessment, how many kilos, basically assessing how much feed we've got on the property. And you know, last year with the drought, we were pretty confident that, you know, we weren't going to grow any more feed in a hurry because it had been so dry for so long. Just to put some context around it, like, we're usually in a 450 mil rainfall average, and in 2018 we had received 170 millimetres, which was our lowest rainfall since 2006, which was in our time our lowest rainfall already. So we'd had 170 mils, and then to back that up in 2019 we had 150. So we'd had our two lowest rainfall year records in the past sort of 100 years, consecutive years. Where these photos have been taken, it probably doesn't show out, but a third of our country is actually set up for flood irrigation, and we actually rely quite heavily on that, and we use that quite strategically in our business to grow a lot of feed in a short period of time. The compound effect of that with those consecutive dry years was that we weren't in the position to be able to use that water economically to grow grass. We sold some water and you know, basically effectively bought some hay because the water price was well out of what we could make it economical to grow grass with.
Yeah, gotcha. And just a couple of questions on rainfall. I know you're just talking about your average rainfall there. But I do know that you're quite a fan of tracking rolling rainfall. With those terms there, you were talking about average rainfall, not say a 365-day rolling rainfall. And you know, for everyone out there, what value do you place on that rolling rainfall?
Oh, it's critical. I think the rolling rainfall, if you sort of said, oh, what's the one thing you'll keep an eye on in terms of, you know, matching stocking rate to carrying capacity, you know, our long-term average probably about 6 DSC a hectare, and that's given that we're getting our average rainfalls in and around that 450 mils. And ironically, at the moment, I don't think we're still up at that. I think our rolling average is about 430. We still haven't gone through that mark, which visually on the property at the moment, if you saw the feed that was there, you'd think, oh, look, you know, we're having a great season. But it probably is still a hangover from how dry it was. And we didn't get any rain last year from July through to December. And the previous year, we didn't have a fall over 10 mils between February and November. So we had these big, long spells with very little rain.
Yeah, that's interesting. So with that, like, you know, feed everywhere at the moment probably looks even like more feed than what we're looking at on the right now, on the right hand picture, but you've still got a lower than you know, the target sort of rolling rainfall. So do you find that can be quite deceptive and really play with your decision making when you're starting to make decisions just based on what you see, opposed to, you know, the broader context of, well, what created that grass, what's allowing me? I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about that? We've had a few conversations over the years about that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose going down this journey, like, we've been planned grazing for probably, I would like to think, reasonably well for probably 5 years. We probably started it 8 years ago, probably 10 years sort of since we did the training. And so I think we're really starting to get, like, understand, our soil health is improving. It's taking a while, but we're actually starting to get pretty efficient growth for the rainfall that we're getting. So I think over time, I'm hoping that our stocking rate will increase because our soil health is improving, our water holding capacity, our nutrient cycling, all these types of things that we've been trying to work on. And so we are probably now growing more grass per millimetre of rainfall than we would have, say, 10 years ago. I'd certainly like to think so. And so we probably need to be increasing our carrying capacity, benchmark carrying capacity, which we sort of tend to use for that. Are we matching our stocking rate to carrying capacity, making those decisions?
Yep.
The levers that we use, because we've sort of got the seed stock business, we probably run our cow herds probably between 60, maybe 70% of our DSE rating at any point in time. And then the next 40 and upwards % is a buffer that we use in either trade animals like cows or sheep. More than happy to have sheep at the moment. We've got sheep on. I really like running like sheep and cattle together. Their grazing habits are very different. They selectively graze, the sheep certainly, and they graze differently. And we were trying to reduce the number of mobs that we've got. And I love having sheep and cattle together because you can always have them in the one spot, but you can easily have 2 mobs and just flick them out if you need to split them up or move them somewhere else or whatever you're going to do. So, and I think a lot of these is so much diversity is so important. And we talk about diversity of grasses, diversity of biology in the soil. And I think we need to probably have diversity of livestock above as well, rather than just having a big mob of cows running around. That different grazing habit and different grazing pattern and the behaviour as well is, I think, is really important.
And tell us, Mick, how has that sort of changed over time? I mean, you're running some sheep now, though, in terms of just different classes of animals and so forth. Do you find there's just as much benefit, or do you use leader follower mobs, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've done the KLR marketing training, so we're making a lot of our decisions based around, what's a good trade. And so overpriced, underpriced is extremely important for us. But also, and by having sheep in the system and having it set up so that we can run sheep, we run a sort of a 2-wire Kiwi Tech portable fencing that we can have sheep and or cattle behind that. And that gives us a lot of flexibility. Our watering system is catered for sheep and cattle. So we're probably not we went down the stud path a few years ago because we were trading purely before then. And I really like the KLR principles. I think it's really great, but I just sort of got a bit sick of always having underpriced and overpriced stock and not ever sort of relaxing about, are we matching our stocking rate to carrying capacity? And I felt that we're always every month we were making decisions on, should we be buying stock, should we be selling stock, how are we tracking along? And that was really great from a grass management perspective, probably, but I just didn't feel like we could relax with being sort of comfortable with the enterprises that we're running. And the reality for me too is I really loved breeding animals. With the animals that we're bringing in and trading, we were still measuring daily weight gains on these animals, and you get a huge variation in them, and you'd be wondering what's happening there. Is it genetics? Is it feed? Is it their weaning, or is it the background that they've come from, and all this? We're pretty big believers of the low stress stock handling as well, trying to have animals content and efficient in their paddocks. And so, yeah, that was all just another little piece of the puzzle, the genetic part of it, I suppose.
And on the genetics, I'll just flick this next screen up, which is quite interesting. We've been talking about this earlier today, but with the seed stock business and experiencing ridiculously dry conditions where you did end up making a decision to containment feed and keep your core breeding animals, did you still find that there is always a bottom 10%? And what's your seed stock core breeding herd look like now compared to going into it? Is it actually an improved beast?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a really tough. In hindsight, like, this drought's going to be the best thing that ever happened for us. In 10 years' time, the animal that we'll have has been improved by the really hard decisions that we've had to make. We sort of I met Kit Farrow when he came out here in 2014, and I've seen him a couple of times. I went over to the States and saw him in January 2017. And so we're using some of his genetics, and also we bought a lot of cows from Australian herds, some Rennie Lee and Landfall, a few other studs. So we sort of melded a bit of Kit's theory and pressure that he's put on animals in a very similar grazing business, and also some of what I probably regard Australia's better genetics from a carcass perspective and performance perspective. Probably a lot of different operating and land management goals from some of those bigger studs, but their animals are pretty functional. So it's a bit ambitious, but we basically, our aim is to breed an animal that's adapted to these conditions and can handle the daily moves, can handle having to work for their feed, handle some high density grazing from time to time, handle running with sheep, and perform. You know, at the end of the day, we're just using the cattle as a tool to utilise the grass we're growing. We're, you know, I like to think we're microbe managers really, and we use the microbes in the soil to grow the grass, and then we use the microbes in the cows to grow the beef, and that's sort of and the lamb, and that's sort of how we're just in the middle, just trying to orchestrate a bit of it.
I thought you were talking about micromanaging, because that was a little bit of a segue to the next slide, Mick. But micromanaging, but you know, there's a questions come through about soil health as well, and someone just asked the question, where were you coming to us from? And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're about 70 kilometres west northwest of Wagga in southwest slopes or Riverina area.
Yeah, in the Riverina, genuinely. Yeah, we are. We like to consider ourselves on the Riverine Plain.
Yeah. So I shouldn't say southwest slopes at all. I'd cause great offence depending on.
Yeah. If we ever go to sell the property, not that we will, but we'd certainly say we're, you know, just near Wallenbean somewhere.
Yeah, on eastern fall country. That's right. So what we're looking at here is, you know, is your property, and I thought it'd be interesting here where it looks like we've got all of these individual paddocks planted, but what we've got here is you actually have the permanent paddocks defined by the yellow boundary, and the green lines are essentially where you run your temporary fencing. Tell us a bit about this, Mick, because you could just be looking at how are you harvesting grass and what are your paddock analytics, etc., telling you and informing your decision making, and you know, we wrap that up in the tool and forecast and all those sorts of things. But you're choosing to even micromanage a bit further here and look at these smaller segments. So tell us what we're looking at here.
Yeah, well, when you see it like this, it looks pretty complicated. It's certainly not this complicated. So we've actually got 24 permanent paddocks on the property, ranging from about 45 hectares to 10 or 12 hectares. And so what you see there, that yellow boundary, there's basically 24 paddocks similar to that. And then I use a lot of temporary electric fencing, Kiwi Tech fencing. And so we move stock sometimes daily, sometimes 3 times a week. We really don't, you know, I really try and stick to that, especially in the growing season, that sort of an animal in no spot for longer than 3 days to really avoid that second bite. And because we've got 45 watering points, there's no more than 150 to 200 metres on the whole property without water.
So essentially what we're looking at here, Mick, is each and every time that you string up a fence, your temporary fencing, you're stringing it along the same lines, and that's because from an efficiency perspective, and these numbers that we're looking at is, I guess, the context of you're seeing your stocking rate today, and you know what that is.
Yeah.
But this is what you've actually yielded or consumed. You've grazed out of each of these sections, and you can see, what is it, 10 or 12 hectares in total. But you know, look at the difference and performance and those subsegments of that paddock.
Yeah, that's right. And so I suppose, like all this stuff, it's shit in, shit out. So if we were starting to get to the stage where we were consistently grazing pretty small areas, like 2 to 3 hectare areas, and because of our watering system, we found that I was putting the temporary fence up, basically on the same spot every, you know, or a lot of the time. And sometimes we might, you know, do a double area because we've got more animals in the mob. But so what I was thinking, you know, and this came about a conversation with sort of Cole and Barton backwards and forwards a bit about, you know, should we go down this path of actually subdividing the paddocks, like the cells on the farm, into actually the areas that we graze in. And so we made did that earlier this year, and I've been really pleased with the information it's been able to give us, and especially from the yield perspective, because that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of, you know, that's when we're converting the grass we're growing into kilos of beef, and you know, and then that's the product that we're selling. So we need to be able to manage that, and by, you know, keeping a lot more of an accurate record of it by using these smaller area, then, you know, we can get a bit better information out of it. And
so this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like on the ground, I guess, and that main picture there, despite you having some, you know, flash four-wheelers and adaptive troughs and watering system, because your wire is only as good as your water, right? You know, so you said to me once or something, is that there's no segment of the paddock that's, you know, more than within 150 meters of water or something like that. Is that right? Yeah,
basically it's all. I looked into a few different property designs and whatever when I got into this, and I went and saw the Kiwi Tech stuff in New Zealand in the year 2000, when I was at university, and I was really sort of in the back of my mind, it was always just sitting there thinking, oh, geez, this is great. I really like the technology. And then when I started my holistic management training with Bruce Ward, he sort of, you know, as soon as we started doing this grazing planning, thinking, oh, look, we need all our animals in the smallest spot as we can, then that was, you know, I knew that the technology, the Kiwi Tech, would really come in handy. And the Kiwi Tech fencing, I basically realised then that our water system that we currently had wasn't adequate. So, you know, from a business perspective, we were putting on, you know, 150 kilos, 100 kilos of single super a year in, year out. And I just pulled our fertiliser budget for 2 years and invested that into water and wire. You know, bought a $10,000 motorbike and a couple of $1,000 worth of Kiwi Tech gear. And then we spent about $60,000 on poly pipe and fittings and a few bit of labour and whatever. And we put 9 k's of poly pipe, 63 mil all under the ground, with hydrants coming off every about 150 to 200 metres, depending on the layout of the paddock, and just in a big grid. And then now basically we've gone from having 24 permanent paddocks to basically an infinite number. We could have, you know, 400 or 500 paddocks if we wanted, if we could sort of go that path from an intensive grazing perspective. And we just keep changing our paddock size depending on our mob size and our recovery.
Yeah. So in terms of, you know, you've invested in, you know, planning and some simple but effective infrastructure in a very considered manner, because I know that in terms of, you know, this all looks to a lot of people like a whole ton of work, but in, you know, essentially you're all about labour efficiency as well, because you're wanting to do things off farm. So, you know, just a quick one on that, and we'll scoot along to a couple of questions shortly. But just tell us a little bit about, you know, your focus on labour efficiency and essentially, you know, what's the net result of this? Like, if you were managing this, how you were managing it, you know, 20 years ago, what would your stocking rate be versus this? And, you know, would the labour efficiency essentially be any different?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty ruthless on labour efficiency, and we used to do some benchmarking with the Home Sacket, and I still get some of their reports, and they sort of talk about, you know, a labour unit, especially in beef, should be sort of 15 to probably 20,000 DSC per one labour unit. And I was looking at us and thinking, oh, we run 3,000 DSC, so that means I should only be there a fifth of the time. So, you know, realistically, I was thinking, well, if we're going to be fair income about this, I only should be on the farm probably 10 to 15 hours a week, and the rest of the time I'm not. So we made a decision I work off farm, basically 40 hours a week off farm, and I spend the other, you know, couple of hours, I spend probably 2 half days, if that, on the farm. and to try and be labour efficient, but also we're running a reasonably labour intensive from a grazing perspective, but we don't really spend our time doing anything else. So I just basically move stock and do pasture assessment, and we don't really do much else. We're not spraying a lot of fertilisers or chemicals or whatever out. We're not, you know, a little bit of maintenance fencing, permanent fencing, but basically very little. I really just go out, move stock, and get out of there. And you know, the stock are there all the time. They're working for me every day, and we use them as a tool. And you know, but we try and do that very efficiently.
Well, essentially, they're trained. They know what they're doing. I mean, you turn up, they know what's about to happen, don't they? I guess.
Yeah. The thing I wish in some ways we did have a little bit more time, because sometimes I'll get out there and they shouldn't actually be moved, but I have to sort of move them because I've got somewhere else I've got to be. And so I am a big believer in looking at dung, the cow dung, and the conditions, the gut fill of the cow. We do monitor that regularly, but in all honesty, we probably don't really move on that, because we're moving, like I'm always planning how big the next area is going to be, and then, or probably more so the time that they're going to be in that area for. And that's probably the big factor where I adjust. Every time I'm moving animals, I'm saying, right, well, I've got 4 hectares that they're going into, so how many hours basically will that allow them to be in there for? And we basically calculate it certainly within half a day, if not less. I don't know. We have a Facebook page for our cattle stud, and I've had a few things up there where I've had examples of even only 30 animals, but 30 animals in the wrong spot for 12 hours more than I had planned, and they can do a lot of overgrazing in a very short period of time.
Actually, yeah, Bart Davidson just today retweeted something he did a few years ago, earlier today, about, you know, the real cost of reducing the recovery period, or essentially, you know, overgrazing and coming back too early.
I think that's the big thing I got out of. Yeah, sorry, mate. I think when you guys had Jim Gerrish out earlier in the year, that was the real big take home I got out of his talk, was that, you know, grass grows grass, and we've done a bit of trial work on that this year in ourselves with our mob. And you know, I'm a really big believer of the more you can leave behind, the more you'll grow, especially in that winter time. Like, I think this time of year is probably not so important for us where we are, but in the winter time, we sort of sped our rotation up faster this year than we probably would have normally. But what it did was it held our grass, especially our annual grasses, which, you know, we've got a lot of. We're trying to head more perennial, but we held our annual grasses in a lot better vegetative state. And, you know, just looking over the fence there a month ago, a lot of the neighbours were sort of barley grass and ryegrass all coming out in head and whatever, and we were still actually very vegetative. And probably even now, like, things are running up to repro now, but we probably got another fortnight to 3 weeks of genuine vegetative growth, which I was really pleased about. And also, now that things have gone reproductive, we're laying a lot of grass onto the ground and, you know, really armouring that soil, covering it right up to get us right through the summer and autumn. And I'm really pleased with how, you know, had I been a bit more organised, I would have had some up-to-date photos for you of what we're actually doing today. And we're putting, you know, a lot of cover down, and I'm really pleased with how we're sort of setting the place up.
Well, what we might do, Mick, we've got a few questions coming in. I mean, I've really enjoyed the chat, keeping going. We're a little bit over time, but we've still got everyone hanging in there. We'll promise not to go terribly much longer. But this, you know, I thought I threw this picture in here. This is one I took when we were out at Broken Hill last year, and there's for the first 3 people that can tell us who's in that photo, as long as you're not in that photo, there'll be a bit rather tokenistic little prize in the mail for you. So shoot that through on the comments or the Q&A if you can know who those roosters are. But I thought, you know, this picture sort of, you're clearly looking at something, and I know that you're not looking at the sunset for looking at the end of the sunset of your career or anything. You're always looking at opportunity and what lies ahead. So what can you see ahead for you, Mick, on your property or the industry in general? You know, what are your thoughts and what are your take homes for people? And then we'll get into a few Q&As.
Yeah, well, I love this type of question, Cole, because I think that's probably one of the big unintended consequences that I've gotten out of this whole sort of holistic management, regen ag type of movement is that I've developed a real appreciation for us just being, custodians of the land. And for me, in our family, we just, we're managing things. What's our landscape going to be like in sort of 200 years? That's what we're wanting to, our vision. And so we're trying to create the conditions, making decisions with that time frame. And I think from a business perspective, we want to create the conditions, fortunately, like my parents did, where they had children come back into their business. And for us, we're wanting to do the same thing. So we're wanting to make decisions that are based on providing opportunity through enterprises and scale into the future. I really always get really excited about what our future resource base will be. And every time I'm out at the farm, I'm sort of thinking about that. I probably then the next step that I've really only probably got into the last 5 years, but is becoming quite a powerful thing. I think it's really an untapped energy. Is that subtle energy, the quantum physics of what's going on the land, and there's a lot more about it that I don't know, but everything I learn about it, it's really only positive, and I just can't see where the downside to using that as a tool in your decision-making process is at this point in time. So I think, you say, look, where am I going to be in 80 years, I'll only be sort of 120. And so I've probably still got a few more years left. And, I think, I just want abundance, really, probably stealing that word from Joel Salatin, that sustainable abundance is what it's about for us.
Yeah, Mick,
being adaptive too, I suppose.
Yeah, and I know that's a lie, actually. In 80 years, you're going to be 122 anyway, so not 120. But that's all right. We won't hold those 2 years against you. Look, it's been a real pleasure. We've got a couple of questions coming in. I thought we'd just keep it on. I sort of tried to change the slide to the questions, but everyone's got a few in anyway. And if we don't get to them, Mick and I will run another little session, and just like this has been recorded, and it'll be sent out there. And for those that haven't been able to join us live, they'll be able to have a look at it, or you'll be able to revisit it. But we'll do another session on some Q&As as well, that ones that have come through and we won't get to today, and we won't get to all of these. But question about do you see a fall in performance from Lockie? Do you see a fall in performance with smaller paddocks? I guess it depends.
Yeah, it does. You've got to be like, we haven't done a lot of high density grazing, and that's probably a function of my labour efficiency. I'm just not there to do the 3 or 4 moves a day that it would require. So we haven't seen it from that perspective, but you've got to be mindful of it. Like, especially in the seastock business, like, we're wanting to run our cows under commercial conditions. So I don't mind if if they do it hard, if we do, knock them around a bit. That's sort of part and parcel of what we're trying to achieve. But we are measuring performance. Like, we're doing, monthly to 6 weekly weighings of especially our bulls and heifers. So we're getting that performance data on them. And a year like this year, extremely happy with the performance of them. Even last year, although we didn't grow a lot of grass last year, the quality of the grass that we grew was actually really, really high quality. And from the young stock growing out, they actually grew out really well. We just didn't have any extra feed to run any other trade livestock. So I think adult performance is, and a lot of that's about observation, about monitoring their gut feel and their dung. We're a really big believer of that. But I really think we're over a hump with that, animal health perspective. I was talking to a guy today. He said he lost 15 cows with bloat this winter time. Like, bloat's just not an issue for us anymore. It's just, I don't know exactly what it is, but we just don't have problems with it. Like, and our grasses are probably, I don't know, there's a pretty good diversity. Lots of weeds, lots of grass. All those things have just sort of started to settle down.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that sort of leads on to a couple other questions. One from Nihat, and apologies if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, but Really enjoying the talk. Thanks, Michael. Like to know what frequency you're doing in terms of monitoring your change in soil, vegetation, and animals. I think you've sort of covered off the animal measurement, the vegetation. You're sort of giving your pasture assessments and validations and quantification of your pastures. Pretty much every move. But in terms of soil, we haven't talked about what monitoring you're doing on the soil. If you could just give us a one-liner on that, and we'll get on to 2 more questions, and we'll close it for a night, and we'll run another session to make sure everyone gets those answers. Yeah,
cool. So I'm in Land to Market, so they do a verification outcome every 5 years and an annual monitoring every 12 months. And then I've taken lots of soil tests over the years, and we're constantly monitoring what's going on there. We're not really putting any inputs on, but we're monitoring what changes are occurring through the biology that's starting to improve in the soil. And we've got a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but we're certainly heading in the right direction. And I'm a big believer of that. Nicole Masters' sort of do no harm is probably where we're at this point in time.
Yeah. Look, we've got some really wonderful questions coming in, so I'm looking forward to our next session that we'll run in the next couple of days. That we'll run, Mick, but and get all that out to people. So please don't worry that your questions haven't been answered tonight. If you would like to get in touch with Mick directly, he's kindly provided his details here. More than happy to. He's more than happy to get in touch, stay in touch. I think one of the things that sort of astounds me is a bit of a community that we're both involved in is just how willing people are to help others and guide others. And thank you so much, Michael, for being part of this tonight, and the work you're doing with local land services as well is just, I guess, that extension work is just sort of an extension of the personality you are, but it's it's rife in the industry, and the modes of information sharing, just like these webinars or whatever, it's all accessible now, and it's wonderful for you to be. So thank you. So everyone, thanks for joining us this evening. Good in the morning, afternoon, night time, all over the world. Really appreciate everyone being here. We'll be coming back in 2021 with the next Champions of Grazing Innovation series, though there will be a lot more to come from MaiaGrazing and various webinars and series and guest speakers that we'll be having over the next few months. I also look forward to being down in Wagga this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, for that intensive grazing clinic, of which MaiaGrazing very proud to be involved with yourself, Mick, and local land services and RCS putting on. It's no point promoting it really at the moment because it's sold out. But Mick, that was good news that you'd really like to be putting one on sort of early next year. So if anyone would like to put their name down to attend an intensive grazing clinic, 3-day clinic type thing, get in touch with us here at MaiaGrazing with the details on the screen. We'll see you this weekend, Mick. Looking forward to these few days together. And you're going to be a busy boy in the next few days with this AI palaver that you're involved in. And I look forward to driving home this closed season graze planning with you. Make sure it happens for as you get into it in November. But any parting words, Mick?
I think with all this, just you've got to be responsive. There's lots of information out there. That's one of the challenges, is sifting through it all, I suppose. But for me, someone like Maia, and we use a lot of other different things, you just need to have the right tools in the toolbox. Probably don't think you know everything, but don't be scared to reach out and ask the right people for the right advice. And that's where I think it's just so important. There's no way at all that I know everything at all, but what I do make sure I do know is the people who actually know the information. I just try and pull it all together, really. And that, I think that's really sort of powerful to, be quite humble about it, but just get the right people around you.
Well, you must know something, Mick. You're already bringing quantum physics into your grazing. So I'm impressed. I'm looking forward to you telling us all about it this weekend.
Yeah, no, that's Terry McCosker there.
Good on you. Very good. Well, thanks everyone. Happy grazing, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thanks, Mick.